Looks like chaos has been waiting for us.
What's going on, YouTube? In this video, we will be looking at Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, and whether or not I recommend this game to fans of Final Fantasy or action games in general. Yes, this game contains a lot of
Chaos.
Like a lot.
Are you chaos?
And this game also packs a lot of fast-paced action gameplay to satisfy fans of the genre. As a rather unorthodox Final Fantasy game, this title has a lot of people on the fence as to if they should pick it up, and for good reason, especially after last year's E3 reveal trailer, which didn't exactly put forth a good first impression with its chaos-heavy narrative and its focus on turning enemies into shiny red crystals. I've put in nearly 50 hours into the game, and I am happy to report that Stranger of Paradise is indeed a good game that is worth picking up, but not just because you're a fan of Final Fantasy. Let's find out why. Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is a game developed by Team Ninja, the studio famous for its tough-as-nails Ninja Gaiden series, along with its more recent Soulsborne-inspired Nioh franchise. Stranger of Paradise's gameplay is quite similar to that of its Nioh counterparts, where linear levels with interconnecting shortcuts and Souls-like combat is the name of the game here. Don't go in expecting gameplay like that of the Final Fantasy VII Remake here, as the combat on offer in Stranger of Paradise is a bit more fast-paced with a deliberate focus on collecting lots of gear and frequently cycling out poorer graded gear for the ones with better stats. Your enjoyment of this game revolves around knowing what you're getting into before making the purchase. And that's why I'm here to help you decide if this adventure is one worth delving into. Now that we've discussed what the game is in its most basic form, let's take a quick look at the game's story. Without getting too much into the story, as there is a lot to unpack here, the title thrusts you into the role of Jack, a brutish man hell-bent on taking down chaos.
Are you chaos?
As the protagonist of this story set in what can be considered an alternate reality version of the events of Final Fantasy I. Centered around the Kingdom of Cornelia and ridding the world of darkness, Jack appears completely out of place, as his tattered black t-shirt and jeans heavy metal look contrast greatly to those of the more royal look at the Central Kingdom of Cornelia sports. Hence, he's a stranger in this world. Unsure of his past or where he is from, Jack, armed with an intense motivation to kill chaos, unites with Ash and Jed, each sporting black crystals as they believe themselves to be the warriors of light destined to take down chaos. Along the journey, this motley crew expands further as they fell more and more of Chaos's minions, while at the same time learning more about their past with each defeat. The story reveals more and more of who Jack and his companions are as you progress through each chapter, and although the game can be incredibly entertaining with how completely and utterly aware it is with its fascination of chaos,
Are you chaos?
the story is ultimately quite forgettable and doesn't deliver any emotional payoffs that the mainline and other spin-off Final Fantasy entries tend to do. If you do manage to enjoy the story, then perhaps your enjoyment of the game will be greater than mine, even though I personally think this game is a blast. Instead, the game's combat mechanics and robust job customization are the real draws to this spin-off Final Fantasy title. Because you are playing as a brutal dude who is solely focused on taking down chaos, this game makes you feel that visceral thirst for blood more than any other Final Fantasy game before it. Co-developed by Team Ninja, responsible for the highly acclaimed Nioh franchise, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin feels like a Nioh game set in a dark and twisted Final Fantasy setting. If you are a fan of both of these franchises, you are most likely going to enjoy Stranger of Paradise quite a bit, like myself. It is a perfect marriage of elements of Nioh, with its variety of different weapon classes, special moves, and brutal takedowns, with the added flair of Final Fantasy with the use of various magic, classic Final Fantasy enemies, and its staple fantasy-inspired locations. Fans of Final Fantasy will be pleased to see them able to brutally dismantle classic enemies and bosses of the franchise, including Tonberry, Cactuar, bombs, flans, and more. and even hear some cool samples of classic Final Fantasy tunes mixed in with the game's soundtrack. The bosses all deserve special mention in this game, as they are all unique and challenging in their own right. All bosses have two phases that greatly changes up the flow of the battle, and provide some of the most nail-biting moments the game has to offer. The combat is fast and in your face, just like Jack is with his lust to kill chaos.
Chaos.
Players have no stamina gauge, so they can unleash as many standard attacks as they want, although there is a limit to how many power moves or spells they can cast, as that is all managed with the MP bar beneath your health. Players can increase their MP bars by using the Soul Shield when an enemy strike hits to increase their MP while also blocking the attack. In addition, players can finish off an enemy when their break gauge has depleted, prompting you to soul crush enemies in a brutal finisher that leaves the enemy in a mess of bloody crystals and further expands your MP gauge. Speaking of break gauges, this is basically your structure bar, and is similar to Sekiro or Sifu's gauge, where if you were to have your enemy's break bar depleted, you can go in for a brutal finisher. Be aware that you have your very own break gauge as well, and if yours were to fully deplete, you would be left completely vulnerable to enemy attacks for a brief period of time. Your own break gauge depletes while blocking incoming attacks and getting hit from enemies. If you want a more detailed guide to the game's combat, along with numerous tips, go ahead and consult my tips and tricks video I made about Stranger of Paradise, link in the description. Along with the combat, features a rather robust class system, allowing you to adopt numerous fighting styles with their own weapons and unique skills. Each job can be leveled up to unlock more and more customization and perks, allowing you to customize your playstyle with incredible flexibility. Up to 2 jobs can be switched to and from by a single press of a button. The traditional warrior, lancer, and monk are all here, along with the white mage, black mage, red mage, and dozens more, giving you a staggering amount of customization to be had for your playstyle. After leveling up certain job classes, you will unlock more jobs that provide even more perks and special abilities to tinker with. This, coupled along with fun and challenging combat on offer in Stranger of Paradise, is what really makes this game worthwhile to play. Like I said before, the strength of Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is in its near-perfect blend of Final Fantasy elements with the excellent combat and loot mechanics of Nioh. Speaking of loot, there is a lot of loot. It is absolute
Chaos.
Like the Nioh games, or if you have played looter shooters like Borderlands, loot drops from nearly every enemy in the game, with standard enemies able to drop a few pieces a pop, and bosses able to drop 2 to 3 times that amount. Loot is distinguished based on its rarity, with white being the most common, up to blood orange being the rarest. Frequently equipping gear with better stats will make your time through Stranger of Paradise a lot more manageable, especially later in the game while playing on tougher difficulty levels. It is often a good idea to dismantle unused gear to get crafting materials used to further upgrade your favorite pieces, as this is what will be essential when trying to complete the game on its highest difficulty setting. Certain weapons you get can only be used by certain classes, so if there's a particularly rare or powerful weapon you have and would like to try it out, try a class that allows that weapon and tinker around with it. Each weapon class handles very differently from one another, and a great amount of fun is had experimenting with different playstyles and skill configurations. The customization is near limitless in this game, and this aspect of Stranger of Paradise needs to be praised. In combat, you are joined by 2 other computer-controlled allies, and although you can't control them directly, you can engage with their skills, known as resonance abilities, by hitting left or right on the D-pad. These skills are invaluable, as your allies can redirect aggro from enemies and can conversely dish out a lot of damage. Just like Nioh, you can play cooperatively online with up to 2 players. Online is a lot of fun in Stranger of Paradise, as nearly the entire game can be played cooperatively. You may enable online play in multiplayer lobbies before a mission or during a mission, and configure your experience exactly how you want it to be. By hosting or joining a friend or stranger's game, you can complete tough stages you were having difficulty with while you were on your own, or just play casually and collect some good loot in jolly cooperation. If you want more information pertaining to everything there is about Stranger of Paradise's online mode, you can check out my video guide in the description below. Also, if you are liking this video so far, do me a solid and go hit the like button to push this video out to more people, and subscribe to the channel for more reviews, tips and tricks, and discussions surrounding video games. Your help is greatly appreciated. Although most of what I've said is quite positive, there are aspects of Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin that I wasn't particularly a fan of. As mentioned earlier, the game's story is not very interesting, nor does it have any emotional draw to it.
Any questions?
Jack is a character that is hard to stomach and relate to, and although he does have some development, he goes down as one of the most forgettable characters in Final Fantasy. There is no amount of shouting chaos that can save him from that fate.
Well, this isn't exactly a standing ovation, but it'll have to do.
What do you want?
Other than the story, the game doesn't look very good. Even on a PlayStation 5, the game's graphics are muddy and incredibly pixelated in spots. Vistas that are supposed to be intentionally beautiful and serene stand out as eyesores, as the blurriness and lack of polygonal sophistication magnifies the game's clear lack of industry standard graphics. Even as a PS4 and Xbox One game, this game looks considerably worse than even the earliest games released on those platforms nearly a decade ago. In addition to the not-so-stellar graphics, the frame rate is wildly inconsistent, even in performance mode. On the PS5, the game would drop frames rather frequently, and never had a consistently buttery smooth performance across any of the game's stages. One final gripe I had with this game is that I wasn't impressed with a lot of the environments with it. With many of them taking place indoors, it prevented us from seeing the natural beauty of the very first world of Final Fantasy, which is a big bummer. Also, the interior environments, although sporting slightly different color palettes, are very generic in level design and often feature plenty of stairs and elevators or warp pads to advance to higher levels.
All I care about is
Chaos.
I hope the game's DLC addresses these concerns and adds more variety to its main levels and side missions. As a package, Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin is indeed one of the strangest games I have played in a long while at the same time being incredibly fun despite its fair amount of shortcomings. As a big fan of both Final Fantasy and Nioh, this game ended up being something that I never thought I wanted to play, but I am really happy that I did. It's a game that probably not many people wanted, but in the end will make fans of both franchises really happy they played it. If you are just a fan of Final Fantasy though, and want gameplay similar to the more recent entries in that franchise, I can't guarantee you are going to enjoy this game, as the story alone cannot compete with any of the mainline entries and spin-offs. If you like challenging combat and rewarding customization, then this game can provide hours of fun for you like it did for me. In the end, I ultimately recommend Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin to those who are open to playing a Final Fantasy game that has less emphasis on the story, but much more emphasis on slaying classic enemies and bosses using traditional Final Fantasy jobs in a fast-paced, action role-playing format.